This is my final synthesis reflection for INST 723 by Ashley Reisinger. The objective of the project was to mentor fellow teachers by assisting them with specific technological tools that could be integrated into their curriculum for their specific learners. I feel that I have met this objective and had some positive feedback from both mentees that I worked with and have assessed and evaluated myself throughout the project. Steps taken to accomplish the objective. The first step was to get to know the mentees that I would be working with through this project. I did this by going on Piazza and looking at their specific introductions that they provided. I also sent a greeting to introduce myself. I think it's important to get to know the people that you're working with during an instructional design plan because it is a team effort and you want to get to know the people that you're working with and establish a good working relationship. So I did that first. Then I completed a learner analysis by looking at the specific students that these lessons would be for. I went on Piazza and looked at Libriska and Jonathan's learner analysis and saw that Libriska has a separate setting classroom with students who are low-level readers but middle school aged. I also looked at Jonathan's learner analysis and saw that he has a 5th grade classroom with a variety of learners that he works with. It's good to know who your learners are because you want to create lessons that specifically cater to those learners' needs and objectives. So first I figured out who the learners were that we'd be creating for. Then I looked at Jonathan and Libriska's goals to figure out what their specific objectives were during the lessons. What did they want to accomplish? Jonathan's goals were more specific to math. And the Libriska's were concentrated more on reading, specifically with long and short vowels. After figuring out the goals, I started to research instructional materials. For Jonathan, math is a newer content area for me to teach. So I searched specific words that were in his goals, such as number and operations, conversions, volume, and found sites that help students learn how to do these specific skills. With Libriska as well, I searched key terms like long and short vowels and tried to find websites available that would help them learn these skills. Also, from the learner analysis, I was given a list of technology that Libriska and Jonathan had in their classrooms, so I tried to find materials that they would be able to use with the technology that was available to them. After providing instructional materials, I collaborated with my mentees on how to integrate that technology and design the lessons. We did this through several different types of communication methods and just talking about the different resources I provided, what they thought would work in their own classrooms, what else they needed from me, and we worked together on how to incorporate the technology into their lessons. After designing the lessons, the mentees taught the lessons and then they followed up and talked to me about how the lessons went, what they could, what didn't work, what worked, so that we could evaluate how the lessons were that we created. Throughout the instructional design process, there were some challenges that I encountered during our collaboration, but then I found solutions to overcome some of these challenges. The first challenge was finding communication that worked for the mentees and myself, and finding a common collaborative time to communicate. During the beginning of the process, the initial communication was through Piazza, and it's hard to communicate a lot of information through Piazza, so we tried Skype, which was better to communicate. I felt like I could take notes while I was talking to them on Skype. The problem was finding a time where we all were on Skype at the same time and being able to do that. So we had a couple challenges meeting on Skype at the same time. So we also used email. I emailed both my mentees at one point when I really needed to contact them and couldn't wait for them to be on Skype the same time as me. So I emailed them with some questions and follow up on their lessons, and then they were able to get back to me when they had the time to do that. So the biggest problem kind of was just finding a time where we all were working together, or finding technology tools where we could all work at our own pace or at the time that was best for us. The next challenge was the new content. I am a language arts teacher, so I know a little bit about the reading skills that Libriska was talking about, but my level for language arts is mostly middle and high school. So the lessons she was teaching were more lower elementary school skills. So even though I knew what most of the reading skills were, I hadn't had much experience actually teaching some of those lower level skills. So it was good to find some skills that actually some of my own students probably could use, even though I do teach sixth grade. Math was also, with Jonathan, completely new territory for me. So it was interesting to plan a lesson for a different content I've never taught before. It was a little challenging at first just because I've never taught math before. I actually spoke with my husband a little bit. He teaches math, so I found kind of another source and asked him for some suggestions. So he was kind of my subject matter expert on that as well. But I also used Google to kind of look up these terms, figure out what they were, and just searched on the internet to figure out what the skills were first, and then finding resources after that. So it's a little challenging to first understand the content and then find resources for that. But I was able to do that just with a little more time and effort. The new Common Core curriculum, I think, is a struggle for all teachers this year just because it's new, it's different, we're trying to figure out how to collaborate it into our own lessons. So I think Libriska and Jonathan had new things that they had to teach. So they're understanding the content, figuring out the goals and objectives as well, along with me. So that was just one challenge, but I think that we were able to understand the specific curriculum and find some resources that fit those specific objectives from the new Common Core. Another challenge was that Libriska and Jonathan had few technology resources in their classrooms. They had, on their learner analysis, they both listed that they had computers available. Jonathan had a lab that he could go to, and Libriska had a few computers in her room. So there was little technology to work with, and so I think it's easier to plan lessons when you have lots of technology available at your fingertips. There's lots of options that you can do with your lessons. So we had to work on finding creative and interesting and engaging things for the students to do with limited technology, which once I looked on the internet and did my search and found lots of materials, we had several options after that. I also found it a little challenging. I found out later on that Jonathan had an Elmo available to him, and Libriska had a few other, she had a projector in her room. So it was a little challenging at first to really understand the learner analysis and what technology they had available. And I felt like this was similar to the charades project, where I'm getting certain clues, not necessarily in the order that I would want them if I'm the guesser. So I had to kind of take the missing information and it was added to this puzzle of the instructional design throughout the experience. But some of that information would have been a little more helpful at the beginning after we'd kind of been through the process. There were several challenges throughout the experience, but I feel like we as a team overcame these challenges and were able to troubleshoot and figure out solutions for each one of these things. They might have slowed us down a little, but I feel like we had solutions for all of the challenges. My reflection for working with Libriska specifically, we had great communication through Skype. We had a really good long conversation through Skype, and we've emailed and had several messages through Piazza. So it's pretty easy to communicate with Libriska overall throughout this project. She didn't seem as comfortable with technology, so I feel like she really needed assistance with the technology, which was easy for me as an instructional designer because I was willing to help her answer. She had lots of questions that I could answer. So I felt like our collaboration together, we had really good communication. We were able to talk through any problems that she had or suggestions I had for her. And she was really willing to take my suggestions and change her lesson according to that. I provided her with several new resources. She really enjoyed the Val and reading websites that I gave her, provided for her. I explained what Audacity was, which she thinks would be a great program for her to use. We're trying to figure out how she can download that with all of her restrictions with her school's server and things like that. But I think she found some resources that maybe she couldn't just use for this lesson, but for the future as well. So that was definitely good to help her with that. I also gave her some assessment suggestions. She had the students in stations, and I suggested she do a ticket out the door because when you have them in stations, it's harder to gauge what they specifically learned and to assess their learning. So I suggested a ticket out the door, and she added on to that and thought it would be good to have them evaluate the resources. So their ticket out the door, their formative assessment was to see if these websites were helping them, what did they learn from them, and I think that helped with the overall success of the lesson as well. She also provided some resources for me. She suggested this reading program that her school uses, which I'm interested in finding more information about, so I felt like I learned from her just as she learned from me. And she provided really positive feedback about the lessons and the collaboration in general. She sent me an email that just said this was one of the best collaboration experiences she's had before, and that the lessons that I provided for her were really helpful. She has shared these lessons with people at her own school, and so it was an overall good experience working with Libriska, and I feel like we collaborated well together, and it was a success from the product that we created. Working with Jonathan, my reflection for that was a little different than Libriska. We communicated similarly. We talked on Skype, we emailed each other, we sent messages through Piazza and resources. So I feel like we were able to communicate well together. Jonathan felt more comfortable using technology, and so it seemed that he needed a little less assistance. With Libriska, she had lots of questions or was open to lots of suggestions, and it felt like Jonathan kind of had his plan already set. He didn't seem to need me as much, and so it was hard as a leader to kind of force myself in and say, well, here's how, it's hard to help someone when they seem to be good with the technology and the resources that they have. So I feel like it was still a successful collaboration, but he didn't need as much help I wasn't in much of a leadership role as I was with Labriska, but I felt like we both still worked together on this project. Researching the math content was a little unfamiliar, as I spoke of before, so I felt like I was learning the content first. So that took a little longer working with Jonathan, where I had to become more comfortable